Good evening, Marc Lowe in Tokyo. It's May 1st. Basically, I want to talk about Paul Auster tonight. And actually, I teach literature at university. I have for several years now. When I first came back to Japan, having obtained my Master of Fine Arts at Brown University for creative writing, I started teaching at Kyushu University and full-time, and I was in the literature department doing American literature for 2 years. I guess a year and a half to maybe 2 years, maybe less than 2 years prior to that, when I was at Brown studying creative writing, I had the opportunity to hear Paul Auster give a reading of what was then his current, work, and I think it was 2009, 2010. And I met him. This may be hard for some viewers to believe, but I was in a kind of shy phase. Actually, the entire time I was at Brown, I was kind of quiet and kept to myself. I mean, you could say I'm sort of more like that now than I was in between when I was, doing rock bands and stuff in Fukuoka or whatever. But, I'm very gregarious now and talky with people if I have things to talk about. So had I had the opportunity to have met him again, I think, I would have engaged him in conversation more. But at the time, I kind of was like, oh, Mr. Auster, nice to meet you kind of thing, like sort of starstruck kind of thing. I didn't say much. But he's a nice man, and I did get to hear him read, and he was there with his wife. He was also an author, Siri Huzvet. I think that's how you say her name. I'm not sure about the pronunciation, but and she appears in his novel City of Glass. I'm going to talk about his work because, in addition to having met him, prior to having met him, I was already a fan, if you will, of what is his, to date, his most famous work, even though he wrote it very early in his career, the New York Trilogy. And, it's a trilogy. It's 3 novellas, you could say, short novels, that are generally published together as the New York Trilogy in one volume. I think in Japanese the same, but you can sometimes find them separate, or the first part, City of Glass, is sometimes available. I've seen it available as a separate novella, the first part. City of Glass, let me say a few words about City of Glass from the New York Trilogy, because actually I think I read City of Glass first, and the reason I didn't read the New York Trilogy is because I remember I had taken it out of the library. I think it was before Brown. I think it was when I was maybe at University of Colorado, and I think it was the university library there. I'm not sure, or maybe I was in Japan, and it was a local library, and they had some, English language books. I don't remember. Whatever it was before I went to Brown, which was 2008 to 2010. And the library had City of Glass only as a separate volume, and I read it and was absolutely, absorbed by it and loved it. And actually, I've been a fan of Franz Kafka, Samuel Beckett. These are kind of names that are often associated. Samuel Beckett, he spoke French, and like Auster lived in France and translated French poets and so on. But anyway, Alain Robbe-Grillet, another French author who I later became enamored with, particularly his early fiction. The later stuff gets very, very, very S&M-ish. It's okay, but I think the early work is really extraordinary, some of it. The Erasers, Le Gomme, which is a kind of detective story, a kind of metaphysical detective story, to take the term. And here now you're going to see Professor Scholar Marc Lowe, because usually I don't present that side much on this page. Although I'm going to be also, I'll make another announcement later, something that connects to that. Detecting texts. This was from a conference that was given several years ago And the subtitle is The Metaphysical Detective Story from Poe to Postmodernism. There's a lot of Edgar Allan Poe literature here because Edgar Allan Poe is still considered the first to write detective story, detective fiction. He's credited with actually creating the genre before Conan Doyle, before Sherlock Holmes and all that. Right, there's so many kind of famous detectives we could talk about, but Dupin was the first. In Japan, there's Lupin, which is like a manga or an anime. And that, I guess, comes from Dupin too, Poe's detective, who, I guess he also smoked the meerschaum pipe, which, maybe that's what Sherlock Holmes was smoking too. Maybe they're smoking something else, I don't know, but that's how they can get to the bottom of these cases. But at any rate, Poe's created a trilogy, like New York Trilogy, with Dupin as the main kind of detective figure, and he solves the mysteries. In that trilogy, the Purloined Letter, Murders in the Rue Morgue, I guess, is the most famous of them. I think it was the first, and then the Purloined Letter, and then there's a third about the murder of a woman. Murders in the Rue Morgue, it's like, locked room mystery, right? All the doors are locked. How did the murder occur, kind of thing, and all these, kind of tropes, themes that we find in detective fiction were sort of established in Poe. Okay, so from Poe to postmodernism, now moving closer, and why am I talking about Elaine Rope Gray erasers? Why am I talking about Poe and all this? So it's going to connect with City of Glass and then with the New York Trilogy because, in fact, if perhaps some people watching this know this, that in City of Glass, the main character, Quinn, Daniel Quinn, DQ, like Don Quixote, and so on, is not actually a detective. He's a lonely man who lost his family in an accident, and he lives alone in New York, and he's kind of a mess after losing his family, and but he's also a writer of detective fiction. He writes under the pen name, and the pen name is William Wilson, and William Wilson is the name of a character in a Poe story, so it's a very obvious reference to Edgar Allan Poe, who's credited with the first detective novels, detective fiction, not novels, they're short stories trilogy. William Wilson is actually a story about a doppelganger, or a double, another theme that appears in City of Glass quite a bit, and actually throughout the trilogy, you could say, the New York Trilogy. There are all kinds of references to Poe throughout, not only City of Glass, but the entire trilogy. I didn't want to just talk about City of Glass. I could actually do a separate video talking about New York Trilogy, because I teach that at university. I've taught it several times, and I'll be teaching it again next semester. This semester, I'm not teaching that. My announcement will come later about something I am teaching and something I will be doing for this page in a couple weeks, maybe. It's not yet confirmed. But anyway, also, why am I talking about detecting text? So lots of essays on Poe, but there are also several essays on Paul Auster's New York Trilogy. Let's just have a look here. I haven't even mentioned, why am I talking about Paul Auster today? Well, those of you in the know who are watching the channel, I'll get to that too. I mentioned how I had met him in 2009, 2010, around then. I'll get back to this. We'll keep it this, it's not a mystery if you know, but Armchair Detecting, or the Corpus in the Library. This is the first kind of section after the preface section. And by the way, the authors of this, Patricia Merivale and Susan Elizabeth Sweeney, they're sort of the ones who are using this metaphysical detective story, like Elaine Rope Gray's early work, The Erasers, and some of the other early ones. And like some would say that Poe he created the genre that some of his novels were sort of, from the very beginning, not novels, I keep saying that, short stories were from the very beginning sort of foreshadowing. Okay, to use a literary term, that's not exactly the term, right? But they sort of hinting at what would become the metaphysical detective story, which is what I'll explain that. Kind of, I sometimes think of it or refer to it as like a philosophical detective story or existential detective story. They're often open-ended, where the detective does not solve the case. And the metaphysical part, to use Merivale and Sweeney's term, is that it's beyond, it's not just solving a case, who done it, where did they do it, and how did they do it, and why did they do it, what was the motive, kind of thing, which we get in more typical Sherlock Holmes type stories, right? Elementary Dear Watson, they solve the case, that's the end. And then you don't read it again, maybe, unless it's really well written, because the punchline has been given away. But with something like Auster's work and something like Robbe-Grillet, something like Abe, Kobo Abe, I did Boxman write the song for Kobo Abe. I studied Japanese literature as well. I have a master's in Japanese literature. I did Kobo Abe was my thesis in Japanese literature. Boxman is my song for Hako Otoko, which has elements of, you could say, this detective, but it's not a straight detective story. But I think the novel before that, actually, Moetsukita Chizu, the ruined map or man without a map, is a kind of detective story where the detective kind of loses himself in the mystery itself and doesn't kind of get to the bottom of it, and just he's in a recursive loop, when he's trying to figure out. And ultimately there's like a psychological part for the character, the detective, that they find out something about themselves, or they're trying to find it but they can't, kind of, it's like the mysteries of existence, of life. So that's why I say existential. Like, you think of Sartre, you think of Camus. Again, I'm talking literature and philosophy a little bit here. And these people really, Abe Kobo was influenced by Auster, right? He does French poetry, literature, translation. Certainly he's influenced. There's lots of references, by the way, in this trilogy, to all kinds of American literature as well. Like, you get Henry David Thoreau, you get Moby Dick, and what is it? I have the Office of Dead Letters, right? I'm teaching this tomorrow. Bartleby, Melville. Okay. Poe references, as I mentioned, all over the place, and references to many, many, many American writers, authors, thinkers, historical figures, and history too, and the Bible, the Old Testament, Tower of Babel. Language is another thing. Semiotics, Derrida, and these kinds of, knowing something about this stuff. Barthes, is like very helpful to analyzing the New York Trilogy. New York Trilogy was written very early in Auster's career. There's a story behind that too, I could tell. But I'm kind of jumping around. I wanted to say, I'm talking about this, and actually, these scholars are writing about these things in here too, which obviously I've read this. I use this text. I didn't require it for the students, but I used like one or two of the essays, maybe two of the essays I shared, not about for Auster, for Borges, another writer of short stories, and he wrote like Death in the Compass, which is another one that it's like the detective gets caught up in his own web. He thinks he knows the answer because he thinks he's outsmarting the bad guy, Red Scarlach, but actually Red Scarlach outsmarts him because he thinks he's so smart that Red Scarlach is another step ahead of him, knows he's going to make that mistake because his ego is going to get involved, and he does, and then he gets caught in Scarlach's trap and is murdered. I'm not giving away the ending, actually, because the ending, there's more to it than that. That's just like on the surface. You have to read it to get, these kind of metaphysical detective fiction. It's like not just what happens, the punchline. It goes well beyond that. It's like, philosophical, metaphysical, existential, sometimes even like in Death in the Compass. It's not Auster, but Auster too, though. The Tower of Babel, right? You've got religious or quasi-religious elements, like Death in the Compass is Kabbalah, is a part of that story. And if you're a David Bowie fan and you're interested in Station to Station, 1976, when Bowie was doing cocaine and writing characters of it's actually the Tree of Life, the Sephirot, with chalk on the floor with his hair all slicked back on the back cover, you know, the Station to Station album. That's what he's doing. So that's in the Borges. But they're detective stories, but they're not like typical, right? They kind of run you in a spiral, and you have to read it and reread it and reread it to kind of get what's going, and then you might not even catch everything or be able to solve it because it's a kind of unsolvable thing, and that's kind of the point of it, that life isn't sort of easily, right? You can't tie everything up so neatly always. So in this, let me get back. You see how my brain also goes around in these spirals, and then phew, but I always come back, I think, usually. I haven't forgotten. Armchair Detecting, or the Corpus in the Library. First essay, Mysteries We Reread. Mysteries We Reread, like Auster's you certainly would want to. And Mysteries of Rereading, Poe, Borges, and the Analytic Detective Story. Okay. And then another on Borges, and then Poe to Echo. Then the second part, I'm going to get to Auster, right? Hard-boiling metaphysics. You've got Man of the Crowd, which is Poe. Again, a lot of Poe. Then number 5, work of the detective, work of the writer, Auster's City of Glass. Here's the first one, Jeffrey T. Nealon. The next essay, also on Auster. The question is the story itself, and subtitle Postmodernism and Intertextuality in Auster's New York Trilogy. And then there's other Nouveau Roman, which is actually Alain Robbe-Gouillet. There are things on him. And, okay, and one more. The last essay in here, the final essay, and these are from a conference that people had presented. Number 12, Subject Cases and Bookcases, Impostures, and Forgeries from Poe to Auster. Okay, so now I've given that whole thing, and I do a course on this, so I'm not going to give the course in this video. If anyone's interested in engaging me in conversation about this stuff, you can leave a comment, I guess. That'd be fine. I'm happy to, I actually have written on this, and I've written on, I did Stephen Milhauser, another author that I teach, and he's still contemporary. He just put out a new book. I know I'm talking about Auster today, but this is Disruptions, which I'm also teaching this semester. I'm teaching this, actually. And I don't have the physical copy. To get back to Auster, I'm teaching the Red Notebook. And the Red Notebook is nonfiction, or it's marketed as such. These kind of little stories that seem unbelievable, but you have about synchronicities in real life and things that happen. Is it 100% true? Is it 100% nonfiction, or what is the line between fiction and nonfiction? These are themes I talk about with my students, but it's not a fiction class. And so we're reading it as essay, but also discussing, and the students, obviously, they know that Auster is basically a fiction writer, poet, translator, and an essayist. And so, and I show a video of his interview and talking about, the uselessness of writing and art. So I'm teaching the Red Notebook this semester, and Milhauser, I was going to say, I did a paper several years ago about a Milhauser short story called The Slap, and I also talked about how that could be read as a kind of metaphysical detective story, and I believe I talk about Auster in that essay, although it wasn't the main point of the essay, but I did reference New York Trilogy in that essay. I did a section, I think I wrote a section on him. It's been many years ago when I was at QDI. 4321, this brick of a book later, in later years. This was written very early in his career and was the book that made him famous, really. Before that, he tells the stories about how they couldn't afford to eat and all this stuff. It's in the Red Notebook, actually. And there is a Red Notebook in City of Glass. Intertextuality also with his own work, which he does, which I love. And that's something that Abe Kobo did, and that's something that a lot of authors I like do, and that's something that David Bowie did, like with Major Tom, coming back in Ashes to Ashes, and the astronauts, the helmet with the skeleton, and many people say, oh, that's Major Tom has died, right? This kind of thing. That's a kind of, right, making connections, like an intertextuality thing too. And I do it in my music, and I did it when I was writing fiction actively. I publishing fiction. That's I went to Brown for Master of Fine Arts. I bought this several years ago, and I still haven't read it. And I'm going to admit that, so I can't talk about it, but it's on my shelf, and I still haven't said, why am I talking about Paul Auster today? Rest in peace. May 1st. So I got the news. How did I get the news? This is an intertextuality, but this goes back to something I said. I'm also teaching this semester. I've mentioned the Red Notebook. I've mentioned Stephen Millhauser. I teach literature in Tokyo. For the first time, I'm teaching Brian Evanson, Fugue State. And Brian Evanson was, I was at Brown with Brian Evanson, and he was my advisor. And I was a fan before that, and I love his work. And this is from 2009. He published this actually when I was at Brown. And he's done much, much more since that. And he had before. The Wavering Knife was my first introduction to him. Also a collection of short stories. And I did a song called The Knife It Wavered, in parentheses, for Brian Evanson, and published that music. Very rare that I do a tribute to a living person whom I know. Okay, like I did a song for my good friend, rest in peace, James Izzo, Boy Without Hands, because he was born without hands and was a musician. I did a song for Kamui Day. I don't think it's even in circulation anymore. He's an artist, a painter, whose work I really liked. He died in 1984, Japanese artist. I did, for Sakamoto Riichi after he passed. I've done many for Bowie and others, tribute songs for generally people who have passed on, but Evanson, and this is several years ago, and Evanson's alive and well, and that's the news is coming, I'm going to give. So not just talking about Auster tonight, but that's a big part of it. But Brian Evanson, I'll be doing an interview with him, and it's for my students, but also I'll be sharing it with a wider audience because I think it'll be interesting. Fugue State, I'm teaching this. Tonight's talk's not about Brian Evanson, but I wanted to mention that, and because there'll be more literature-themed things on this page, maybe more from now. I mean, this is my job, actually. It's like the page looks like just music and me talking about solitude, but actually I teach literature. I was on Brian Evanson's SNS feed, and he posted shocking news that Paul Auster has passed away May 1st. And then I checked, the sources of the New York Times and NPR and stuff, and read his obituary. And I remembered last semester when I taught the New York Trilogy, this semester I'm teaching Red Notebook, right? When I was teaching New York Trilogy, I was, kind of updating my knowledge, whatever. I checked online for some information on Paul Auster, the person, biographical stuff. And there had been an update. It might have been just Wikipedia. I don't remember where it was. It may have been, or it was an interview or somewhere. And it said that his wife had confirmed that he had cancer, and I kind of saw that. I was in class talking to the students, and I said, oh, that's too bad. Because the last I had seen him interviewing on YouTube and shared with the students, he said, oh, I'm still very healthy, I'm very lucky, kind of thing. And then it was like, oh, he has cancer. And then today I heard the news, as many of you may have heard, and if not, you now know, that he passed away. He was 77 years old. The obituary didn't say what the cause of death was, at least the one I think I read at NPR. But I do remember reading that he apparently had cancer, so I'm assuming it's that. He was 77 years old. I mentioned the personal part, or, well, several personal things. I mean, first that I was a fan of City of Glass, and then after I read just the City of Glass separately, I went and I bought, it's not that expensive, I bought a paperback version of York Trilogy, and I read it, and then I read it many times. One of the first things I taught when I came to Kyushu University in 2011 to teach American literature was York Trilogy. I did a class, and sorry to my students then, maybe it wasn't the best version. I mean, I've taught it several times since then, and I've read it several times since then, and I think my own understanding of it has deepened, over time. And so now, but every time I teach it, it's interesting because, like I say, it's like, you can keep digging into it. And it's not just digging, but it's, it's interpretation of things, and, you notice things, or and it deals with language and Tower of Babel, right? That people can't communicate with each other because they all speak different languages. That's the religious from the Bible, right? That God created this. There was that film Babel. I mention this to my students. They don't know it because it's before their time with Brad Pitt, right? It's like, miscommunication. And that was sort of a globalization thing, right? Now we're post-globalization, so students don't know the film. But so Auster, I also last semester, I do teach quite a bit of Auster, and not just in the York Trilogy, and now I'm doing Red Notebook, where I mentioned I taught the Book of Illusions, which is about a fictitious silent film actor. And simultaneously, there's another story about a man who's researching him, very similar to Quinn in City of Glass. He's kind of a broken man. He lost I don't think it was a full family. I think it was just his wife. If I'm recalling correctly, I know, or maybe it was his wife and kids. Like, Quinn loses the family. He loses the family, and he's, again, like Quinn, he's a mess. And then he discovers the films of Hector Mann, the silent filmmaker, who's also not like that famous. It's fictitious, but he discovers him and sort of wants to pull him out of obscurity and writes a book about him, and then he gets connected, and that kind of saves him from his sinking. Quinn is saved from his sinking into misery and alcoholism and all those kinds of things, it seems, when he gets a phone call in the dead of night saying, is this are you Paul Auster? And that's already the joke from the beginning. It's like, wait a minute, huh? The author's using his name, the Detective Auster Agency. And apparently there was, Auster himself has told the story. He received a call from Pinkerton. No. Asking, someone saying, is this Pinkerton Detective Agency? And he said, no, click. And apparently the call came more than once. And he thought to himself, what if I had said yes? What would have happened? And that's the premise of how City of Glass begins. So Quinn gets out and does that. I taught, like I said, also last semester, this Book of Illusions. And that's quite a different kind of book and style of book. But it's got kind of that similar, I thought, thing where he's saved not by a phone call, and it's not a detective thing, but he, writes the book, and then he gets involved with people, and there's all kinds of things. I won't go into that book. We're talking about that novel, but so yeah, I've taught quite a bit of Auster. I like Auster a lot. I mean, it's been many years, but I read Leviathan and all sorts of. I read many of his novels, not everything, and I still have this one, which I pulled it off my shelf after, because today it was like that, and I was like, oh, I still haven't read that. Maybe I'll get to this. It's a brick, right? But it's paperback, so it's not too bad. I've got Distortions, Milhauser, and hardcover. That's actually lighter than this, though. So I thought tonight I would just say something about this because, like I said, I met him. It wasn't like we're not best friends. I didn't say much at all. I was kind of shy and like embarrassed, not embarrassed, but I didn't know what to say, or kind of like, at that time. And like I say, now I'm so, talkative. I've taught his novels, and it'd be a different situation, but he's gone. I was going to say one other thing. It was kind of also getting a bit personal, but like he came from Austrian Jewish background heritage, and he was born in New Jersey. And I happen to know that on one side of my family, the background, the heritage is Austrian Jew as well. So half of the half is, the other half is different. But and I was born in New Jersey, and I grew up in New Jersey. So that's kind of similar and interesting. And of course, I've been to New York, Manhattan many times. I can imagine the world of City of Glass. But we lived in New York. And I live in Tokyo now. It's kind of the same, but not the same. The culture is totally different, but it's like, big city. What the Quinn thinks, it's narrated in third person till the end kind of thing. But the Quinn character says, if you want to get lost in, you're surrounded by so many people, but you're completely alone, feel completely alone because you don't know anybody, nobody knows you, nobody bothers to speak to you or notice you kind of thing. You can just be invisible in the midst of that. That's, Quinn in City of Glass, New York. Tokyo's like this too. And people wearing masks. If you want to wear a mask, you can really. And for me, I put my sunglasses on. If I wear a black mask, then I'm really, really so I just do this, right? That's also Man of the Crowd. Edgar Allan Poe is very much this kind of thing, like just blending into a crowd and, becoming anonymous, although you're surrounded by so many people. And it's kind of like that. So I can imagine this. But yes, we have some things in common like that. I don't speak French, and, you know, etc., etc. Many things not in common, you could say, but there's some common points there, I guess, heritage-wise. And I grew up in that part of the U.S., so rest in peace. And everyone has his or her time, right? So okay, well, that's, I guess, what I'll say about Paul Auster. I just kind of was not excited to share. You can see I redesigned my walls. This had been completely blank. Used to be a bunch of stuff on it. Actually, these three, the Bowie, and I can't point because I can't see, Jeff Buckley and Sakamoto Riichi, all three also rest in peace, right? My three kind of iconic, musician inspired by and fan of, and whatever you want to call it, all now gone. I mean, Sakamoto just last year. Anyway, I had just the three up and some other things. I took them all down, right? Because I was doing projections on my wall. That's when I did my Bowie thing around January, around his birthday, and I did the We Miss You Space Boy tribute in my room with the projections and stuff. Well, I'm not planning on projecting on my wall again anytime soon, so I kind of designed it in a chaotic pattern. These are the things I had on that wall over there, and so I put them here in a kind of chaotic pattern, including these. And then that wall has some newer things, and because I've got a lot of new work recently, and if you're watching my page, you see, again, I'm getting into just a bit at the end here, my own work and my and for the first time in a long time, I've been making CDs. And this is from those studio sessions that I posted, but this is a CD version, which actually is different. I mixed it differently. There's some bits that weren't on the video, and there's some bits from the video, like that drum rap, which was kind of a joke, is not on here. But some things that weren't on there kind of made their way into here, or in different, mixed differently, and another 10-minute studio session track. And it's called Where Are the Children, Dear, which was what I entitled one of the improvisations where I just kind of spontaneously did that. This Angels of Time, which is this year's kind of major Marc Lowe solo album work, if you will. And it's kind of thematic. It was based on or influenced by my own work, Angel of Death. I talked about that on this page. Well, I did earlier this year Angels of Chaos. Angels of Chaos hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention. It's a double-length album. I actually put quite a bit of work into that. It took from the last couple months of 2023 into the first month or so of this year, 2-3 months worth of material I amassed and made a double CD or a double length album, Angels of Chaos. Anyway, I took the cover from Angels of Chaos and the cover from Angels of Time and kind of blended them. And this is selections from either, and it's a single CD length. It's more, actually, I guess, Angels of Time, but I took how many tracks? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tracks from that double CD, and the other tracks are from Angels of Time. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from Angels of Time. So I'm making CDs today, and you can see like how I do this. I actually haven't put the labels on the CDs themselves, but I've got all these CDRs, and who are they for? And why do I make CDs? This is the last thing. I'll just talk, And this is the acoustic set that I posted where I'm talking in between. This is, I just extracted the songs and with fade-ins and kind of mixed them. Just the songs, it's 10 tracks and around 48 minutes. There's a tiny bit of chatter at the beginning of 1 or 2 of the tracks, but mostly it's just the songs, the acoustic songs. So this kind of thing. And why do I do this? Who am I making it for? I'm making these for friends in Fukuoka, especially people I don't see. I'm going to send packages out. This is Man Without a Map. This title actually comes from Abe Kobo and also has the Office of Dead Letters, which is Melville. So there's some literary references, and Boxman on here. This is Sunny. And the version I posted on my YouTube page actually is different. It's shorter. This just kept expanding. I had that music for unborn films. I took some of the tracks that had Sunny on them and moved them over here, and the Balinese blues that I had mixed after I put on here. And so it's 10 tracks now, and all of them are Marc Lowe and Sonny Yasser, the Man Without a Map. I haven't cut this yet. You can see how I make this. I cut it and put them on. So I'm making CDs today. I've been making CDs, and I also put up a new This Dark Shroud thing. I don't want to talk just about music, and mainly, it's a Paul Auster. But since I have this sekkaku, as they say, this is the, right? And I put this on YouTube, the audio version of this. You can listen to that. It was up earlier today. But mainly, like I say, it was because Paul Auster's day, I want to do this talk. So that's it. I'll stop there. I'll do other, I think, more literature talks, and I've been thinking about that anyway. Abe Kobo, Paul Auster, Stephen Millhauser, Brian Evanson. I'm going to have the interview. And, these are some of the people that I teach and so on. So I can maybe do some talks on those things too. Thank you very much for joining me, and rest in peace, Mr. Auster. And thank you for the beautiful, wonderful, thought-provocative work that you left us to continue to read and ponder and enjoy. That's it for me tonight. Thanks very much, everyone. Marc Lowe signing off from Tokyo. Good night.